Welcome to the Bikeshed Podcast, where we talk about all things software engineering, current events, and the game of life. I'm your co-host, UI Simp, Alacritus Pollyanna, and Coke Zero Addict, Scott K. And along my side with me is my co-host, Web Framework Connoisseur, the most feared PR reviewer, and GitHub Copilot's own Copilot, Matt Hamlin. Matt, what's our agenda today?
What a wonderful intro. I think today we wanted to dig into a little bit about enshittification and like some topics that are maybe related to that as it relates to web development, but maybe also more broadly. For those that don't know, enshittification is like I think a fairly popular term in the recent maybe 5 years, maybe longer. Just sort of like, things are getting worse is the maybe general consensus. It's like the quality of products that we buy is deteriorating, or you pay more but you get less. So those kinds of concepts. But then I think also like looking at it from the lens of like web development or just development in general. I think that's like kind of like a rough concept. I think with that we also want to kind of talk a little bit about this blog post from Grant Slutton called "Nobody Cares," which is like kind of an interesting, maybe sort of related, and then also maybe dig into a term I think one of us coined, the shadification of the web. So when we get to that, we can dig into that a little bit more. Scott, like what's your take on shadification? Like, is it like how do you see it?
I think you summed it up quite well, to be honest. I kind of read it and did a little research about how people were using it, and it was very much kind of how you're describing it is. We have these software products out there that were once great, and then now they're just currently trending downward. They're not really adding new value. I can name some examples of like things that I've noticed recently. Like I listen to some podcasts on Spotify, and now I get commercials. So the price just goes up. You're not really getting much new things. I will say Spotify has had some good new stuff, like being able to do jam sessions and whatnot. They're still creating features, but an example of like you're paying money and now you're getting ads, that seems to be counterintuitive. Or Netflix is a good example where you used to just pay $7.99. It's just now you pay $25 for the premium, if I'm correct. Otherwise, you don't get HD, 4K, or you get commercials. So they're starting to just say, oh, how can we make more money and not give more, but rather make people pay for the top tier, which is smart marketing, but it's not innovating on what the product was prior. And that's not to say that those are actually two companies that I actually think are good in the tech space and still do good things. But there is just this product's been around for a while. And instead of trying to see where we can innovate and add new value, it's been very much how can we monetize what we have. And the product is kind of going south. I guess a better example would have been Facebook, something that people loved maybe a decade and a half ago when it first came out. It was very exclusive. And even like when Instagram came out, I don't know, 10 years ago, it was like I was in college. Like people flocked to that, and then older folks use Facebook, and maybe some people like Facebook, but hot take, I feel like software engineers move further and further away from popular social media. I just always feel that's been the case. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, on your last point, I don't think it's limited to software engineers. I think it's maybe just people our age is probably
Sure.
Which is like maybe dating us or whatever. But I think you're talking about some like really good examples. I think other sort of trends that come to mind is like, I think like every product out there now is like has to include AI as part of it. And like, it's like, okay, there's some cool AI integrations, but there's places where it's just like, they're just like tacking it on just to like say that they are an AI company or, offer AI features or whatever. But I think sometimes those just like become more annoying. It's like I think a really good example, and like this is like even predating AI, but like like Comcast's like sort of customer service, right? Like it's just like it's intentionally designed to not help you. And now that they have like an AI chatbot in front of like the actual like person answering the call, it's like now it's like it's even more so designed for that. Um, so I don't know. I think there's a lot of examples of that where it's just like they're like all these companies are maybe building features that don't really like serve the need of the original product. I think that's maybe a more broad sort of topic of like companies eventually grow to the scale or the size or the product grows to the point where it's no longer serving the original use case. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I think just in recent times, it just feels like everything, like quality wise of everything, is like dropped off a cliff. I don't know. But like hindsight is probably more important there, though. It's like it's like using Microsoft Word 20 years ago or something was probably probably also had a lot of pain points and a lot of issues, but using it today is probably even worse. I don't know.
You brought
Yeah.
up bringing up AI is really great because that is definitely the current conundrum, I guess. But you made me think of like recently I was looking at product reviews and on Amazon, and they have AI to summarize like everything in the review to tell you like maybe like what's included with the product to try to find an answer. And I feel like, yeah, that's kind of helping the user, but instead of just making a better UI, and we're going to get into this, or make it easier to discover product information, Amazon is a great example. I've wanted to talk about this forever, that like a lot of product sites, like we've built product sites, websites, they don't really care about selling the actual product, or they just want to get as many products up there as they can. And the product details, they at one point were more like we need to get the details up front, but now they seem very secondary. It's like how many products can we throw on a page to try to just sell something? So it's like, again, all about monetization and less about the customer finding what they need. But like, I was using this example of Amazon AI. It's like, yeah, it helps me find like what I need, but instead of just like making the page work for me, we're just going to throw AI in there to summarize it, which probably takes more effort and more page load or request time rather to just to get it to load for me. So that's one thing that you made me think of. And then the other, you talked about like product growing, where the original use case might be abandoned. Now, like obviously, sometimes the products evolve over time, and that mission statement changes. But this is something I like to harp on, is like, what is our goal? What is our mission? I think when we were at Wayfair early, that was always really hit home, like that we were trying to make it easy for people to find everything for their house. And I think that really does drive decision making downward. But we saw firsthand as products grow, people come and go, missions change, people aren't always aligned. And what they're trying to build maybe is a different understanding to everyone. So just having that alignment to make sure that people are trying to build towards the same end goal, or to see that like the space that you're in might change. Try to think of a product, maybe not with an example. You might build something for a specific use case, but realize, hey, there's this use case over here, and we need to pivot towards that. So inherently, I feel like enshittification is partially when they lose sight of a goal, and it's more of just like, how can we make money? Maybe it's not always a corporation, but we're really big, and like we're kind of just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks for monetization value over customer satisfaction value.
Yeah, I think I've been noodling on this topic of I think we've worked at companies where the there's like that sort of common phrase of like, as soon as like a measure becomes a metric, it's like no longer valuable or something like that. I'm probably getting that wrong, but I think we both worked at places where the KPIs became far more important, or like, than actually like delivering value. And I think that's like an interesting thread of like, it's like that's probably become something that's like far more important maybe in the past 20 years or something than in prior times. But and we've both also worked at like places that are very like compare themselves to a lot of other competitors and like see how they rank up against others on different benchmarks. And it's like, I've had this like blog post stewing in my mind of like, like you, like working to like get better at a benchmark does not make you a better product company. Um, I think it's just like you're focusing on the wrong problem. You're sort of focusing on like how do you rank versus others versus like how do you actually solve the customer's needs. Um, and so I wonder if that's like kind of like what you're saying. Like I wonder if this enshittification is like inherent in teams that just grow to a size that start going after KPIs rather than solving customer needs. I think a lot of maybe CEOs or whatever sort of convince themselves like, oh yeah, like if we like the KPI is a way to go after the customer need. I think that like easily slips. It like becomes a proxy metric, and then that proxy gets like further and further away from what they're actually trying to solve. Um, I don't know. It's interesting that like there's this like I don't know. You like companies that start small and like sort of really solve the product needs, like eventually grow to that size. I don't know if there's probably something else that sort of attributes to that.
Yeah, I also think when like folks are aligned and they were like constantly building new products or just trying to build something small, get it out there, get some testing, and then expand on that, we were always more successful because we were like, I guess for lack of a better term, sussing out what the user really wants. Because sometimes it's unclear, and especially in a new space like AI is a good example. Like everyone's just building a chatbot, but is that really what a user needs? Like maybe, yeah, sure. Um, but there are probably more applicable use cases that, I mean, I had the Amazon one. I don't know if that's like the best example, but it is helpful. Maybe clean up the rest of your UI. But you also made me think of like when companies grow, you'll see, and people come and go. You'll see the same tests ran over and over. We did. I'll never forget. I don't know how many header tests tested different navigations in my tenure at W, but it's more than 20 plus, and we always just like got the same data, and we did record data places, but like clearly it wasn't like enough of a necessity to record it and make it available and easy to find so that we could learn from it instead of doing it again and again and again with this concept that like, oh, maybe the way users shop for things changes. Sure, I do think that like there is some of that, but that kind of gets more towards the what we'll get to as our next topic about how a lot of web apps are starting to use like similar pieces or the same pieces, but we were never really creating anything net new that hadn't been done before. It was just how we were going to interpret for the user the easiest path forward. Um, and I wanted to just kind of go down this lane of often I think as companies grow, or at least what I have seen is they start prioritizing feature, 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 feature. They're not thinking about enough about the value that feature builds, but rather appeasing that stakeholder that these features are being delivered and that they might have value, and weighing the value and pros and cons of different features. For years, we didn't have a very specific feature, and that was like comparisons, like a lot of sites that could compare products, and we never had that, but we also would rebuild these features. Matt, I know you want to say something. I have another thought after this, but go ahead.
Yeah. I guess like on the like the feature building, like I think it's less like releasing a lot of features. I think it's more of like releasing a lot of optimizations. I think those optimizations aren't like I think internally in those big companies they sell it as new features, but like for the end user product, right? It's like it's rarely is it actually a feature versus just like you were saying in terms of like the A/B testing sort of flow. It's like they with all those different tests for the header, they weren't necessarily always releasing new features for the header. They were just like reshaping what the header looks like or changing some of the functionality of the header, but like not actually like it's like at that time at Wayfair we weren't introducing like brand new paradigms on how headers work on websites. Yeah, I have like a further point, but yeah, I'll let you get back to
Yeah,
it. Train of thought.
I absolutely agree with that. But I guess more so like often. So I wasn't when I would do it. I can only speak for myself. Is like we would eradicate the old code and write net new code. And it is definitely true that as we grew, like using the header again as an example, it seemed like teams just like moved a thing around. They were not really starting and rebuilding a thing. So the way I see it as it being a new feature is like we just built some new code and replaced some old code, but that may not be how everyone does it, but continue.
No, yeah, I think yeah, like I think internally, right? Like you can look at it as like a new feature or new it's like new, right? But I think if you look at it from the perspective of like a customer, right? Like the visitor to the website, like they don't care if for example, like migrating tech stacks, right? Like they don't care if the previous tech stack was or like if the team behind the product like swapped out the tech stack, right? Like the features generally usually are like on parity with what you're used to before. I think more broadly, it's like making me think of like companies become this and this like phrase sort of came to me as you were talking, but like companies sort of become optimization engines over innovation engines, right? Like I think when you're a small company, you focus on innovation, right? You focus on like how can you solve a problem in a new way compared to your people already in the market or people that have tried solving that problem in the past. And then like when you're a big company, you start to focus more on these A/B tests, like these slight tweaks to different things. It's like we've probably like heard that popular article. I don't know if it's true or not, but like popular article about like Google A/B tests the color blue on their links, right? So like
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, we changed the hue of the blue, and it's like we get 10% more conversion on people clicking through to ads or whatever it is. And so it's like, yeah, that's like an optimization, not a innovation, right? Um, so I wonder if it's just like so many people are just like used to, or like maybe like those optimizations are seen as just like not making the product better, like they're not innovating in the space that people expect. It's like it's like completely different scale, but it's like people asking like where the flying car is, right? Like we're not seeing that kind of growth happen. Yeah.
So you're changing my perspective a little. I do think there were like some, I guess, net new features that they were trying to build, but they're actually you're now making me think that we were at our strongest when we were trying to build new things. Like that's like a new product as part of the product. It could be like a feature within the product, and we were trying to iterate on that, and that was probably when we were at our best. But what I wanted to bring up is what you're talking about like optimizations. They were optimizations, but at the cost of not looking at performance. We, I think maybe other companies did different, but we wouldn't prioritize performance enough. It would constantly be brought up that we either needed some sort of performance metric to work against, that teams would adhere to, or like, people believed performance was important, but it wasn't like, I guess, a first class citizen in the work people did or well taught how to make sure that they delivered that, but rather it was like very secondary in thought. And my original point was like before you deliver something net new, and if you're a small place, like performance can be a little easier. You still have to care about it, but like you might be more likely to have a smaller app and therefore be able to get more out. It's not always the case. Definitely have had implications growing apps at smaller places, but you're able to like there's no one else there when something isn't performant in a small company and you're on the hook. At a big company, your goal is more to appease the stakeholder that they like what you do, and it's easier to this may be a strong term, but like scapegoat another team has to solve problems. Um, which maybe this is like a more big company problem, but it's easier to act as if you have less ownership of a thing when you're described as owning a feature and you view it in a perspective that like I just own this section. And especially like well, this is maybe more specific to the background of like some folks at our company at the time just owned visuals and they never really cared about APIs and endpoints. And maybe it wasn't trained well enough that, hey, that is part of the front end these days. But understanding like how big, well, also having service teams that like provide these for you, that makes blurs the lines a little bit more. But essentially, it's harder to draw ownership lines when there are more people owning things and there isn't clear defined guides. But when you're at a smaller place, you don't need clear defined guides. Like everyone has a stake and care and ownership. So the purpose of this, getting back to enshittification, is sometimes it can happen because lines become blurred and people's motives are to a specific problem that they've been told is what their ownership area is, or it's just all they think their ownership area is, and not clear guidelines about working together as a cohesive unit and making the whole product better. I mean, people talk about 10x engineers all the time, but like really all it means is that like you want to learn and understand the whole sequence of how the applications and the services work together. And that's what makes you a strong engineer. Like I'll toot your horn a little bit, Matt, but one of the things that made you so strong at W is you understood better than most how all the services came together to make the application work. And that is like a superpower. And I've learned from Matt that you need to just make sure you understand the architecture first and foremost.
Yeah, I think. I think a lot of that stuff. Yeah, I think it rings true, but I think it's also like people listening might not understand like that. The structure they had internally. I think really the sort of the core emphasis is like at a larger company, your area of focus is like is pretty small generally speaking. And it's like okay, like as you get higher up in the stack, like in the career ladder at that company, it's like yes, you're going to have a broader perspective. But generally speaking, most ICs are just very focused on one specific feature, one specific product area. And so, yeah, exactly like what you were saying, it's like that leads to like, sometimes people just don't really care about, the broad, like, how does this feature fit into the rest of the product? Or like the customer, like what customer pain point is this solving compared to like the other aspects of the product that the customer is using. Which I think like that kind of leads into maybe our like next sort of little section of this like blog post titled "Nobody Cares." I think that's like I mean maybe this is like not the way that originally the blog post was meant to be taken, but like I think it's like I've seen this sort of ring true where where engineers aren't empowered to take a more holistic point of view on the entire product. Right, it's like if you're told that you can only work on feature A, you might not feel like you have the ability, the agency, whatever, the leverage to start sort of recommending changes or applying changes to feature B, C, and D, right? So it's like in many ways, it's like whether or not it's like the actual like engineer doesn't care, or they're just like sort of forced to a position where they can't apply the energy to care for those other things. I think that's like I think it's just like an interesting sort of perspective on that blog post. Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a scaling factor, right? Like, or it's also a strategy of how do we create, like we talked about like pods, like that was like the big thing and it never really changed, but it was like, okay, people own these specific areas. I would have argued where there could have been larger pools of ownership that crossed over that would help with the blurring of these lines. But I think the bigger point is when you can't define from the top clear responsibilities for the ownership of your job and be held accountable. So like I'm thinking of kind of the RACI principles. Like if you can't define who's responsible or accountable for something like an endpoint speed, or you don't have mechanisms to make it clear about who owns what, because the size of your org is really big. You start to have these like fractions of, you have a problem, you know about it, but you don't think you own it. You might, assuming good intent, you might not think that you own performance when there's a team that like is called performance, right? But then again, if there isn't like some clear guideline to go by to know what performance they own or who to go to ask about these things or to care, um, that's where the breakdown kind of begins too. So it's just like really setting expectations well and defining those expectations. Because I do think like these things are broken down could be successful, but it's more maybe of a lack of education.
Yeah, I would even argue that it's not even the like I think that the root problem isn't that it's like you don't know who to talk to about it. It's like that's even the mindset that you come into that with, right? Like it's like if you're in a culture where you're not empowered to just make change, then you are going to naturally say like, okay, I need to ask someone about I need to ask someone about if it's all right to make this change or if I should be caring about this or whatever. Versus like if you're just empowered to make that change, which is like I think that's the case usually for most startups, right? Like the company's so small that there's literally like no one else knows the answer to your question anyway, so you just have to do it. But in a big company, I think that usually the culture is very much like, yeah, get sign off, like go through some red tape to like sort of verify that you're allowed to make that change and then make the change. Yeah, I don't know. I think it is a. I think that's just like another sort of cultural factor that leads into why Grant in his blog post talked about like nobody caring, right? Like they're not empowered to, at least at engineering companies, right? They're not empowered to make the change they want to see, or actually like empowered to like have the facility to care about the problems they're solving.
Yeah, there's definitely like more bureaucracy of like change making. I remember like someone would propose a change and people would be like, whoa, 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 like looking at the change, really scrutinizing that change. Because when you're siloed on a small team and you all start to like work together and gel, you start to have common beliefs. But getting that out there to the rest of the organization or sharing and spreading those beliefs gets more difficult unless your team is like literally given time to document patterns for everyone to use. I'm clearly taking the stance of a team that like is setting up a platform from my platform experience. But I am saying there's some lack of structure that is to blame, but I do agree with your take that like um, culturally working together and understanding and creating a culture of like how we solve problems is also big to that. But I think that's like basically structure a structure. Like we need to like enforce structure from the top down to help inform.
Yeah, yeah, I think yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I guess like I think maybe we've gotten a little bit far away from enshittification, but I think another topic that came to mind as we were talking about this topic as like being something we wanted to talk about on the podcast was like was sort of the I can't think of a good word, but like sort of the explosion of websites that have started to use ShadCN UI, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly, but I think that's the way you pronounce it, which is a pretty popular like component library that's a little bit different from most component libraries that people have used in the past, in the sense that it's like you sort of like copy the code into your own code base instead of installing it from npm or something. But I think what we've seen over maybe the past year or two, I think it's been around at least 2 years, is that
2 years.
more and more sites are just like they all look the same. It's like if anyone's sort of announcing like, oh, I'm building this like new, generally these days it's like an AI product, but like sort of new website, and they share a screenshot, it's like you can 100% tell that they just like pulled in ShadCN and used it, like used the defaults. And I think it's an interesting pattern that we've seen. I think like a very clear telltale sign these days is if it's like monochrome. Like ShadCN has colors, but like the default for everything is like black and white. I think it's like maybe people don't realize that they were meant to customize it when they added it. I think it's just like pulled it in and said that's it. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Scott, I know you have some thoughts there.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah, so you're right on. Um, you notice like a lot of and this the style for like websites like there's these trends right that it goes through, but like now it's like I have this marketing site where like I have this like really large hero with like slight white or dark black to gray gradient text on it. It's like really subtle, but there's also these like glowy like things going on in the background. You can see it almost on like every little startup site. But you are right, Shatsian. He's even said it himself. The writer of it that like the goal was to give it to you this way so you could be a jump off point for you to create what you wanted. Um, although that's doesn't happen often. But anyway, so yeah, like it's meant to be customized, but um, I think what it's led to though, and it's not just Shatsian, but it's like a lot of these UI systems and I guess design systems, they start to solve things the same. Like even when we worked on design systems, we would look for like third parties that would solve certain little problems. And now everyone's like, okay, I'm gonna solve that problem that way. There's become like standards like Radix is one. But like, handling accessible navigation or tabbing and whatnot, like those kinds of standards start to creep in, which those are fine, but more so that it's just like, okay, we have this concept that's a modal, and now we're getting like tags for it. We have this concept that's a drawer, and we start to just be like, okay, these are the pieces. And even when we were working on it, it was like, we would tell the design team, use the pieces, use the pieces. So the design team is constantly, or the design systems team is constantly being asked to fix those things. And then when they're looking for inspiration, they're just all looking at each other. We start to have all these same patterns that emerge. And like, yeah, you see like a sidebar nav or like a drop down nav, but you don't see as much innovation or chances to like, how can we do things? How can we do things in a new light?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it's like, it's very similar to like what we were just talking about before, where it's like these large companies start to focus on optimizations rather than innovation. And it's like I think we've kind of seen that in the open source space with these component libraries like ShadCN, right? They like, there's now probably more than we can count copies or clones of ShadCN that it's like does the same exact thing, but maybe it's just like maintained slightly differently, or maybe it's for a different web framework than React or whatnot. But yeah, I think if assuming the listener is still listening, it's like you're probably wondering, like, okay, yeah, like how are we connecting ShadCN to this like enshittification topic? I think really in my mind at least, it's like pretty similar to like what we saw the explosion of like sort of bootstrap based sites and back in the day. Scott, you probably have more historical knowledge there than I do, but since you've been doing web development longer than I have, but like I feel like back in the day, it's like when Bootstrap was, maybe Bootstrap 4 or something, like when that came out, it's just like every website looked the same. I mean, the same could be said with like Material UI, right? Like I remember Material UI being like really big, and just like every site wanted to use Material UI. I mean, heck, I built a few side projects and they all use Material UI and they all look the same. And so I think it's just like it's interesting that there's these waves of like I don't know, like sort of waves of everyone looking the same instead of like this. It just feels like there's like a lack of creativity happening around web design, web development, and I feel like that's just like that is like an aspect of enshittification. It's like that's the connection my brain was making. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a lack of creativity is my thought, but like it's almost like I'm trying to say how I can define this, but like a prescriptive solution to solve UI and every UI problem. So like UI is used to be very, for us at least, very creative. Like, how can we solve this problem? Like, what can it do? And now it's almost like, okay, here are the prescribed solutions within the boundaries. Pick them. and not like, well, how could we try to break that mold? I remember a project real specific on the design system that I couldn't gain traction on, where we had this concept of like having sidebars and modals within different applications. I think I called it like contextual modals. That was just the idea of having an application in an application, and how could we handle that? And like that was so novel, I think, to sell, because it was really just like, okay, we have an admin toolbar and we need to wrap it around a whole application. How do we do it? And it would solve something like that's problem. Today, people would probably just be like, make a Chrome extension or something. Like, don't have it in the application at all. And maybe that's valid, but what the purpose of this is just like getting at trying to now break the mold of what people have normalized as like prescriptive patterns to solve a problem has become harder than it once was.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's this like huge wave of momentum around that stuff. I mean, you can kind of see it internally at big companies also, where like a lot of companies invested in design systems because like they, I don't know if it's that they don't value UI innovation, um, but I think it's just like there's this, they just say like, like why rebuild the same UI over and over again, and they're like, or at least that they think it's the word same UI, or that it's the same UI, but it's like it. I think that I think like we've probably equally heard like a large number of questions around like, oh, if we're adopting a design system, does that mean that designers don't do new work, or does that mean that engineers don't get to like explore different ideas? It's like we're just like sort of doing cookie cutter stuff, and I think it's like most organizations usually have a answer to that, and like, no, we're not stifling innovation, we're just like trying to ensure consistency. But I think it's an interesting sort of, I don't know, momentum to like kind of combat and try to come up with something unique and innovative, right? And it's like now we're seeing it in not necessarily now in the open source space, but like it sort of happened, like we were talking about Bootstrap and material, but it's like it's just like more like it's common outside of large corporations also.
Yeah, I almost feel like, so I remember being on the design system and having to sell the design system. And the big sell for the design system is, hey, it allows us to move faster because we have consistency. Everything like looks like the same. So it feels like one cohesive flow. And we have a starting point, or we have pieces, and we can now just focus on the data layer so that the UI can be built quicker and we're not rebuilding the same thing. So we're not wasting time. So it's almost like we did too good of a job as UI engineers at the time to sell the value of having building blocks ready to go. But the bigger problem is just that it seems like the more all design systems have the same pieces, like, and I try to do this all the time. I try to be like, okay, like what should actually be a feature that like is common enough that it's like its own feature. I always talk about like the Command K palette. Sure, it's just a modal maybe, but like that itself to me is something we should just be a feature. Like you should be able to pull in a select drop down in maybe a modal, maybe not. But like if you're building something like ShadCN where it's like any new application might use it, I think that's almost like a common enough feature that should be compound enough to be created. But these are the things that I think like ShadCN doesn't really care about. Like they do this unique thing, right? They're like, oh, here, you take the code and download it, and you own it now. So they wipe their hands clean of like having to worry about things. I remember people talking about, well, what if like Radix updates and it destroys your UI? They don't care. Doesn't bother them. I mean, it hasn't, and I don't even think it's gonna. But the point being, now that ShadCN's so big too, like likelihood that they have to make sure they don't break all sites becomes higher. But point being, that like simplification, it's almost an easier way than managing and owning dependencies, has just allowed them to be like, oh yeah, just copy the code, but like they still get to staple and put their name on it. And it's just very interesting that something as simple as like just copy and paste the code basically, or run a script that downloads the code into a file for you, has become like the norm there. And I find that to be also like part of the problem, I guess, where like if everyone just does it this way and then we get used to it, it comes back to what I was just trying to say like slightly earlier is we just like accept that there are certain ways to solve a problem and those are the only ways. And it just digs this hole deeper that it's harder for us to decide, let's try this new thing or sell this new thing when people will point to and look at Shadzian or like chakra or material and be like, no, this is the way these people do it. This is what works. Without using data, they just use the fact that it exists as the data. People in tech sometimes talk a lot about data, but they don't really use the numbers, which is something, a gripe of mine, I guess. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh yeah, you have to be data driven in this time and age, of course. No, yeah, I think, yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, I think the distribution format for Shadcn maybe was, and I can't say for sure, but like maybe the intention there was to like say, hey, you have control to customize and to innovate. But I think a lot of people just took it at face value and said, okay, like my components that I pulled in used to live in node modules, but now they live in ./UI, right? and I think most people just like say, okay, that's just like whatever, like that's just a change. I don't think a lot of people maybe saw that as like an opportunity to dig in and customize. I think there's still like sort of that like maybe fear in the back of the head of like if we customize now we can't upgrade, and they're maybe worried about that. I think in general, like maybe this is like more of like a sort of closing thought than maybe a continuation of the thread. But I think really what we've been seeing is like this enshittification trend feels like it could be attributable to sort of lack of innovation or creativity, and I think there's like a lot of maybe societal change, like sort of pressures there to like sort of say, yeah, just like do the common thing, like don't try to explore new avenues. Cultural aspects there, and like whether it's like culture as a company or culture as like a country, and yeah, I think it's just like I don't know, it's people aren't willing to like sort of rethink or sort of maybe think from like original like or first principles. I think that's like one of the core aspects, right? It's like even to that point of the blog post of like nobody cares. It's like I think it's just like people are not incentivized to apply that effort or to to like create new things and explore new boundaries and like provide value. Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I feel like I'm maybe like circling the drain on like that thread, but like maybe there's like some insight I haven't come to yet there. But yeah.
I want to bring up the AI stuff too for a second because like, Vercel also has an AI solution. The name is escaping me right now. What is it, Matt?
V0.
V0, yeah. The most obvious name. V0, which basically spits out Shotzi UI for you. And the thing is like well and great, but like it's not going to be creative or do something revolutionary and unique. It's only going to print out the patterns it's learned on or it's trained on. So like that in itself, AI is another part of the problem. Like AI is going to have to be really smart. I don't think we're really that close. I know everything moves exponentially faster than we think, but I don't think we're really that close to an AI coming up with new ideas, because that's just not what machine learning is. So we're going to see more of this, as I'll describe it, like soulless. This is how it works. And if people start thinking that AI is providing the right answers all of the time, it's stripping the creativity from what could happen.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think I saw a thread on this maybe like somewhere on Blue Sky. Maybe I'll try to dig it up and share it in our show notes. But yeah, there was like this thread about like that a lot of companies these days are now asking themselves, not just like, okay, is this, if we're adopting an open source solution, it's like, does this like how many stars on GitHub does it have? Like how maintained is it? It's like the question they're asking is like, does AI know about this, right? Like, does ChatGPT understand this library, understand how it's used, and then that's like the decision making criteria, right? Like, and it's like we've seen this in practice exactly in V0, right? It's like Next.js is going to become the React de facto framework because so many different AI models have been trained on it, and it's just like it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like AI recommends you use Next.js to spin up a React app. You use it, it gets trained on that data for the next iteration, and so you just keep getting into this like ingrained mode of like that is just going to become the way that we build stuff, which is kind of unfortunate, right? It's like we're losing some of that niche part of open source community that's like exploring new ideas because AI models don't know about it, right? And they're not trained on it, and they're not going to like recommend it. Which again sort of like maybe leads to that enshittification, right? It's like everything becomes the same, and you lose sort of value or creativity, and it's just like optimizations rather than innovations.
Well, it's so ingrained now. They deprecated Create React app because they're just like use a framework. At this point, it's like sure there's more, but it's like use Vite, which is pretty much Create React app with some speed and processor layers that help it, and then or it's use Next.js, or maybe there's a TanStack Create. I'm sure TanStack Start. I'm sure there is, but it's like they don't even think that you should start at a bare bones React app anymore because there's so many formulated opinions on where you should start. And that takes the creativity out of what you're building right there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't want to necessarily like cut off any further thoughts you might have on the topic, but I think we've kind of like talked about the core things that we had on the docket for today. I fear that our episode's going to be very like doomer. Like I think this episode and the previous episode have been very like sort of doom or like negative outlook. You know, I, yeah, we need to think about how we can get more maybe optimism into these discussions. But I think it's interesting for like it's worth us digging into them.
Yeah, I don't know if it may be like maybe it seems that doomish in the sense that like we enjoyed some of these things and they're being taken away. But I don't think I don't think that like that doesn't mean we can't still be creative and still try to push these boundaries in our own time. Like I did tell you, like as a silver lining, I was been trying to create my own library, and I want to create like a command K palette as a component, and maybe that'll a way to get some momentum behind something like that. I think that there is opportunity for new patterns to continue to emerge. They will become maybe like standardized at some point, and new things will definitely happen. It's just that we are no longer trying to focus part of our job to discover them, which is maybe a little bit of a bummer, but I wouldn't say it is much doomerism. I do get that like it's AI that is throwing the wrench into like what will our jobs become. It's very interesting. I did have some other thoughts on enshittification. I can't remember them right now, but it's very interesting that it now seems like corporations are like, oh yeah, use AI and use it as much as possible, and let's move faster. That is just definitely an interesting future.
Yeah, I think we probably have a whole nother episode to dig into in terms of like like what there's this sort of I don't know the word for it, but like sort of a spectrum of like companies where they say that they're AI first or AI native, and I think there's sort of like good and bad outcomes of that, and maybe we save that for the next episode. We'll see.
Yeah, but like overall, this concept of enshittification, like I think there's like a lot that makes it occur, but I guess my final thoughts on it is it's a lot of the times it's like a platform gets so big and it's served its purpose that it stops innovating, or it's like you said, kind of loses its mission of like what were we here for in the first place. Like Facebook, for a long time added features, but these apps and these big, especially the bigger apps, I think that they're where it's heading is they're just gonna try to become everything apps. Like China has everything apps, and like Facebook is a good example of that because it's a place to like connect with friends, but now it's a messenger app too. But then also they own a messenger app, but it's also got stories like Snapchat, but also they own Instagram, and that adds stories like Snapchat. It's they're like these everything apps. You can do what you do on Twitter or Blue Sky on there by posting. You can do all of it. So I think, I mean, I don't think it's the greatest, but I think they're going to start to try to have currencies or find ways where they can just be an app that's a super app. And I'm not saying that that's the right answer. I actually don't think that's the right answer because that leads us down a path of like them have these companies have this, maybe this is doomerism again, but companies having so much data about us that they can start to market up prices based on the things that they know we need. Um, but also the point being that like when they run out of innovation, they start to just saying like, what's a whole new market we can get into, or like they don't look at how can we further serve the purpose of our original intent. And that's where these apps kind of have their downfall. Trying to think of like an example like Spotify I had from the beginning. I don't think that we're going to see it like have a downfall, but it is disheartening that you pay for this service. It's gone up. I've had it for probably like 12, 15 years, so a long time now. And you know, it's not too much more. It's like I think $13 a month from its original 7, 8, 10. But at the same time, it's like just it's very disheartening to see it add ads in it. It is adding video, so they are still trying to innovate on it. I talked about the jam feature, but it's when an application becomes a place that just seems to be losing its quality, like Amazon website, for example, um, was like the best place to get products cheap, and then they started raising their prices, and now it's just about convenience. And then they stopped guaranteeing 2 days, and then and this is an episode in itself that we still want to talk about, but then all of the product display pages became about monetizing every product that they own and less about having a good quality clarity around the product that you're interested in. All of that is like, while Amazon is still like a pretty good place to shop, it shows you that like it's a downward trend of like they cared really much about the customer until they had all the customers they could pretty much have, and now they have these customers in their pocket a little bit with things like, you know, people are paying yearly for Amazon subscriptions, so now they just work a little less important about the customer and more about like how can we sell more, make more money, and monetize that. So if they pulled back a little bit and built a UI, and I guess it's very UI centric is why we talked about Shotzi, and built a UI that helped the customer almost more like theater to find the thing that they needed. I hear so many people say like, oh yeah, Amazon sucks when I search. I can't find the thing I need for multiple pages. Or I know that I and some friends of mine are like, oh, you need to look up the reviews and make sure the reviews aren't faked, or you need to look at this other website that exists to look at the price trend and see how much they've raised or lowered the price. When those kinds of things start infiltrating your app, it's no longer about giving the user the best experience, and it's more about just monetizing. And that's a downward trend that like you don't want to be a part of.
Capitalism just like leads towards this, right? Like trying to get the most out of, you know, or maybe extreme capitalism, right? Like trying to get the most value out of every single customer is like just like leads to this case where it's like it's not a great customer experience, but it's like a good enough experience that they're going to convert, and the company knows that. And so, or like they, you know, they build up a moat that is like, yeah, exactly like your convenience, or like you've like shopped on Amazon for like long enough that Amazon knows that you're not going to go to some other site to start shopping at, just because like all the convenience that they've already built up. And so like they just know that they don't need to make it 10x better. They just need to make it, you know, not 10x worse or something.
Or just better than the next competitor in some form or fashion. That doesn't have to be in the facet of UI. And I also just want to point out, we know that Amazon, makes their money through AWS. And that's another example of like a really bad UI. It's not good, but it's like cheaper than most. And they're able to do that because they have that um, capital essentially to provide services, and they did it at the right time. But it's again like I've been told they have like 7 or 8 design systems, and when you look at AWS, it shows half the page is white, then all of a sudden it's dark mode, and then it's just not that's a no for users. Like we need to. I don't know why there's a design system at that point. If the themes are completely different and the whole point is consistency, having 7 or 8 of that is not a strong argument to me. But I digress.
All right, yeah, I think we've probably talked about this topic a decent amount, maybe more than we maybe originally intended.
We'll come back to it though.
Yeah, we might come back to it in the future. Scott, what's new with you? What's a new and exciting thing have you been looking at over the past few weeks that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so before I talk about that, we did an experiment from our last podcast about using and not using AI. We're gonna hold off on talking about that till we have Dylan back. Dylan wasn't able to make it today, so we will talk about that in a future episode. The reason why I said that beforehand is because I started to dig into Avante for Neovim. I've been watching some videos on it, and it is more more cursor AI-like than I thought, and I started to configure it better, and it has been stronger for me. And I want to say that it's helped me in my cop-out answer in my Golang quest of becoming a better Go engineer. But I've been using that, but also getting stronger at Go, where I'm starting to feel a lot better about my Go skill set. One of the things I haven't done yet, but was telling Matt actually last weekend, that I'm really into just starting a Go project. Or what I want to do is I want to build a back-end service in Node, and then you're looking at me funny, Matt. I want to build a back-end service in Node and then refactor it to Go. I think that would be a great exercise for me to continue to grow my back-end skill set. So I've been getting a lot more comfortable though with the language and just understanding what's possible and how everything works, and basically the differences between that and JavaScript. So it's been a ride a little bit, but I'm starting to feel like confident in the language, and it's been maybe 3 months. So that's a real big win for me. Matt, what's up with you?
No, yeah, that's good call outs. I've been digging more and more into, so like even though our last episode talked about like not using AI as much, I've actually been digging into using AI a little bit more. Specifically I've been specifically using the like the composer agent feature in Cursor. But I've also been testing out this thing like briefly. That's called what is it? Codename Goose, which is apparently sort of a thing open source by Block, I think, maybe by Square. And it's this pretty cool thing where it like infers functionality that's available on your computer, and like can like sort of build up its own functions and like agentic sort of resources or tools. It's using like the model context protocol from Anthropic, which is pretty neat. But it has this maybe slightly scary onboarding where it just like you put it up and then it starts like spamming you with things saying like, oh, do you want to like allow this thing access to your files? Do you want to allow this thing access to the network? Do you want to allow this thing access to whatever? And it's like a little bit scary, but I kind of YOLO'd it, and it's pretty neat. It could do some pretty complex stuff. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes, but it's something I've been messing around with, along with like Cursor's like sort of agent stuff. And then also I've been leveraging this like Mac Whisper or Super Whisper, I think is what I installed. It allows me to like talk to Cursor and just like dictate the prompt to Cursor, and then Cursor then goes off and does the work, which is actually really neat. Soon I won't even have to have a keyboard. I can just like talk to my computer and have it do the work for me.
That's pretty cool. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see that link. I haven't checked anything like that out. I do want to make one note about you kind of have me thinking about this. We've been a little bit doomish about AI, but at the same time, you've been leaning in, and I do think it's the right thing to continue to lean in. I just think that as a software engineer, my advice to you, was it that great guru who said that? My advice is to you, to continue. Matt has no clue what I'm talking about. I made a reference that just dated me. Anyway, Gangstar Guru. Anyway, um, what I would recommend is that, like, yeah, I think it's definitely fine to use AI, but you want to make sure when you prompt the AI that, like, you don't just spit everything out and copy and paste it and not understand how it works. You need to find one thing about it that you can understand a little better. I'm really speaking about languages maybe you don't know that well. If you know JavaScript any language well, and you're using it to spit that out, it's a lot easier for you to just look at it and say, okay, I know what it's doing. That makes sense. Here's an optimization. But when you don't know it, you want to make sure that you can break down at least one piece of it and learn from it so that you can continue to keep up with it. That's the route I have been taking, but also just like doing some things and some percentage capacity to just remind yourself you know how to um, solve a problem, because it's so easy to just be like, wait, how would I do this? And then feel like you have this imposter syndrome that you don't know how to solve a problem. So always take on like easy tasks and small tasks, or think about what you're asking it to do and how you might solve it before you just take AI's word for it, so that you're not just mindlessly connecting dots and you don't feel like you are worthless. Matt, you have thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, maybe a little bit ironic. I think I've been maybe doing the opposite. Well, in certain cases, yeah, there are certain projects where I'm like, I want to like be more involved and like I want to know what the code's doing. I want to like write it myself maybe. But other cases where it's just like I've been like YOLOing it, and I was actually talking to a friend of the pod that we both know, Joe, about this sort of topic, and he was saying that also that he's seen like the trend of like people want to be more involved, or like more hands on with the AI recommendations, like the agentic sort of updates. And I was like telling them like actually I just want the opposite. I just want to like tell something like go do this task and then not check back on it until it's like done basically. Like I want us to get to the point where I can like just tell an agent to like do a change and then have it deploy it and validate it and whatnot, and like I've just been sitting back doing nothing. So so it's, I don't know, it's maybe different perspectives there, but yeah.
Well, yeah, well, you write code every day of the week, so maybe for you, you feel like you're still in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do the same thing. Like, I don't think that it's wrong to do that. I think you just need to, um, yeah, one of the things I'm big on is taking time out of your day to make sure you're learning something new. Whether that's something that is completely unrelated to work, but it just needs to excite you, but it helps you with your career, which is like one of the reasons why I use NeoVim. I know I've talked about this before, probably, but you want to make sure that you're getting something out of the work you do, and that it's coming back to you, that's growing your career in any way, shape, or form that makes you feel stronger. I think that it's if you want to, I also do what you do, Matt. I eat stuff into AI and just take it and paste it and go. Sometimes you work on tasks that aren't that exciting, and sometimes that's what you do. But you want to try to make sure that you are aware, and that something engages you and makes you feel like you are solving problems too. So you still have that sense of ownership or sense of completeness, I guess, when you're done with your work.
Yeah, for sure. All right, should we call it there?
All right, peace.
See you guys next week.
Take care.